Some introductory concepts are essential if you want to really enjoy this course of thermodynamics. So, this lecture plans to introduce to you concepts like thermodynamic state, thermodynamic process, and thermodynamic cycle. The objective is, as I said, to introduce to you very interesting concepts so that you would be equipped to solve the engineering problems using the laws of thermodynamics. So, when we talk about thermodynamics, we had already studied the concepts of the system, the closed system, open system, and isolated system. Uh, in order to define a particular system, we need some other terms. The important term is what is known as a thermodynamic state. Let us understand this with the help of an example. Suppose you consider a closed system in the form of piston cylinder arrangement as seen in this figure, and I want to describe this system. I want to describe it such that I would then later describe a process. So what we do is that if I want to describe this system, then we can describe it with the help of thermodynamic properties. For example, let us say that this system, which you see over here in this figure, has a gas in it, and this gas had a certain pressure Pi. This volume is Vi, and suppose this gas is at a temperature Ti. So then we can say that this gas, which is a system, now obviously it's a closed system because there is no mass interaction with the surroundings. We can say that this system is at a particular state, and we can call it as the state I. So this is how we, with the help of thermodynamic state, describe a system. Suppose now this system which we are considering, that is the gas enclosed in a piston cylinder arrangement, which was at a state I, undergoes a process of change of state. For example, you can consider that this gas expands. So what would happen is the volume which you see here on the pressure volume diagram, let us say the initial volume was Vi, and the gas in the piston cylinder arrangement expands to Vf. Okay, so what has happened if you want to describe this? So initially the closed system was at a state I, and now the closed system is at a state F. So in between, what has happened is an interaction, and that is called as a thermodynamic process. So when a system which is at a state I undergoes a change of state to some other state F, the system is said to have undergone a thermodynamic process, right? So this diagram makes it clear what is a thermodynamic process. Suppose this system is brought back to the initial state. For example, this gas is brought back to the initial volume Vi, right? Then we would say that the initial state is regained, and now this has happened with the help of two processes, a process from I to F followed by a process from F to I. In this case, we would say that the processes I to F and F to I in this order would constitute a thermodynamic cycle. So in generic terms, if the system gets back to its initial state after two or more consecutive processes, those processes constitute a thermodynamic cycle. And we come across very interesting thermodynamic cycles in practice. For example, we have thermodynamic cycles in gas turbine power plant, thermal power plants, internal combustion engines. Before studying those interesting cycles, we need to be clear about the different types of thermodynamic processes we generally come across. This processes here on the slide, what you say is there are four processes, representative processes taken for understanding this thermodynamic process. If you see the slide one, the first diagram in the slide, this is a pressure volume diagram, and I had drawn a horizontal line. So the initial state was state 1, the final state is state 2. And because this is a horizontal line on a pressure volume diagram, it means that the pressure P1 is equal to pressure P2, which means that the pressure is constant. So this process 1 to 2 is a constant pressure process. We also use the term isobaric process. Look at the second diagram, which is a pressure volume diagram, and you see a vertically upward line. So what is the meaning of this? It means that during this process, the pressure has increased from P1 to a higher pressure P2. So there is a increase in the pressure and the volume is kept constant as V1 is equal to V2. Okay, this is clear from a vertical line on a pressure volume diagram. So this process is a constant volume process and it is also called as a isochoric process. The third process is the isothermal process, meaning that in this process, the temperature remains constant. If a certain process happens such that there is no heat transfer across the system boundary, then such a process is known as adiabatic process. Adiabatic means there is no heat transfer across the system boundary. So similar processes you would be studying in practice in engineering real life. Now back to the concept of thermodynamic cycle. As I said, we come across very interesting thermodynamic cycles in practice. Look at this example which I had taken. This is a thermodynamic cycle for a gas turbine power plant. You know that a gas turbine power plant has a compressor, a combustion chamber, and a gas turbine proper. These processes which are happening, for example, look at this. Fresh air is taken in by the compressor and it is compressed to 2. So this I can represent on a pressure volume diagram. This is 1 to 2, right? The process of heat addition is shown by 2 to 3. Same thing, this is the pressure volume representation. Similar representation of the process is also possible with some other properties. For example, this is a temperature entropy diagram. We have not yet studied the property called as entropy, but just remember that there is some other property on the x-axis and there is a property of temperature on the y-axis. Okay, so this processes, the real processes which are happening in the gas turbine power plant, these are shown here. For example, this 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, and 4 to 1. These 4 processes in this order would constitute a thermodynamic cycle, right? All these 4 processes are also represented on a temperature entropy diagram, and this is what you see is a thermodynamic cycle. So this is an example of a thermodynamic cycle of a gas turbine power plant. Similar thermodynamic cycles would come across in the coal-based power plants. So this is a coal-based power plant thermodynamic cycle. It is called as a Rankine cycle. Again, you'll find that there are processes in the Rankine cycle. For example, this is a process 1 to 2, process 2 to 3, process 3 to 4, 4 to 5, 5 to 6, and back to 1. So initial state 1 is retained. So the fundamental point is that the initial state is retained. Another example which you are familiar with is a petrol engine, and a petrol engine has a very interesting thermodynamic cycle called as a Otto cycle. So be it a Brayton cycle in the gas turbine, be it a Otto cycle in the internal combustion engine, be it a Rankine cycle in the power plant, all these cycles, thermodynamic cycles, are the practical thermodynamic cycles which will be useful in analyzing the practical systems. So by the end of this lecture, I hope that you have understood what is the meaning of the term system undergoing a thermodynamic process and what do you understand by a system undergoing a thermodynamic cycle.